need drive today for the lab, so pick one up. No. We need hard drive today, okay? So pick one up for the lab. Pick one hard drive up for the lab later before you sit down. Or you can get it during break. Okay, so let's download the notes and assignment. We'll go through those together. And then we'll do the lab today. We're gonna use Windows 10 virtual machine so we can have administrator privilege. So real quick before we start, I did post apprenticeship announcement for the orientation. I think it's this Friday, 4 to 6 for Moreno Valley College. I know RCC does their own, so if you're an RCC student, you can contact John Wilson. He will be able to give you more information about their orientation. But if you're a Moreno Valley College student, you want to know about how to sign up for a pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship. And so we can help you get work experience. And then give you the appropriate vouchers that you need for your certifications. From now until you're ready to go to work or even after that, right? Make sure that you look at the announcement and sign up for the orientation. So after this one, I think a few more months, then in June and July, she's gonna do another session. And then near the end of the year, there's gonna be a couple other sessions. So if you miss this one, that's okay. You just have to wait a little bit. Sometimes students want to wait a little bit so that way they can get the situation, with their car or whatever it is that you need. So make sure that if you're interested in knowing how to go through apprenticeship, it's a good session to sign up. And then once you pass the practice exam for CIS25, or you have to sit and pass the CompTIA A+ certification, you need to let apprenticeship team know, right? If you let me know, I'll let them know. But you need to upload your score, right, onto a system so that way they can help you start going through the process of, preparing your resume, looking for employers that are in the apprenticeship program, and then going through the interviewing process. If they select you to interview. Yeah, so the practice exam in the test out, that's usually at the end, or you can sit for certifications. If you have certifications, there's a higher chance of you getting hired, right, compared to just the practice exam. It depends on the employer. And then if you have security plus for this class, it's also a plus. So if you apply for an apprenticeship that has security component, they usually look for security plus. So I just want to share that with you. All right, so check out the announcement for our class. And then I found a couple other scholarship when I have time in doing this week. I'll post it for you. So you can apply for it if you're interested. Okay, so in this week, we're going to talk about securing hosts. And host could be any system. It could be the system that you're sitting at, the workstation. It could be a server machine. It could be, a smart device, a handheld device, or even an Internet of Things device. So a host simply just represent a system. A lot of the times we refer to the local host is the system that you are currently using. And that could be server or PC or any kind of OS on that system. And then we want to be able to understand how to secure its data because that's the asset. So both of these things are assets in the organization. Now, when you go into the field and you started seeing this here now, hi, you don't need a drive for that. You started using virtualization. The way that we use virtualization here is to be able to give you the experience of using another computer or multiple computer at once with just one physical PC, right? But virtualization can be in many different forms. It is a way that companies can reduce hardware costs. It's usually that. It is also a way that would allow people to remotely access the system via cloud servers, and then be able to control everything through software type of infrastructure. So virtual machines is commonly used not just for testing, but for usage purposes. So for example, I might work for an enterprise and they would send me to different locations all around the world. And when I get to that location, I will be able to access my virtual machine, which is pulled from the server in North America, for example, in the United States, right? So it's basically, I'm accessing a virtual machine on the cloud, and I will be able to have my work status and all the applications that I need from anywhere. I don't have to have a laptop or that physical system at my work facility. I just need to have an internet, a decent amount of RAM, right? A host operating system that's able to communicate through the internet to be able to pull my virtual machine. And there are many different products like VMware. Oracle does have their own, along with what you see for Microsoft, which is Hyper-V. And you can use that to virtualize any operating system that you need for your company with the proper license, okay? So when you use VirtualBox or Hyper-V or VMware Workstation to play your virtual machine, those are called hypervisor. You need to know this for A+ and Security+, right? In security, we use virtualization for a lot of testing purposes, okay? Or even configuration purposes. I talked about the host already. And so when we're saying it's a host for the virtual machine, that is basically the system that would have the drive, right? Could be solid state or hard drive, storage space, memory, network adapter to be able to connect, and then your processor. So you need RAM, right? Storage space or your drive like SSD or HDD. You need processor, multi-core, prefer at least quad and up, and then network adapter. Could be wireless or your physical network interface card, right? So with that, you would be able to run your virtual machine remotely, or you can run it on the physical system, which is what we're going to be doing, right? We've been doing that for a while now. So when you use Kali Linux, or today when we use Windows 10 VM, we're using a guest operating system, which is virtualized. Okay, so let's go through and answer some questions. Sorry, I just lost my thing here. There it is. Okay, so the first question it asks you, what are the benefits of having virtualization in the network? I mentioned this at the beginning, reduce costs, right? Most business opted for virtualization to reduce the hardware costs. Instead of buying 1,000 computers, I can just buy, thin clients, which are more of like the lower cost, low hardware type of system. Spend a little bit more on the software license, and then be able to have virtualization server, so that way I can save money in the long run. Now, on the server side, I don't have to buy multiple systems. I can run multiple server that's virtualized on that one physical machine, right? But it becomes a single point failure when if that physical machine is stolen or damaged, right? It would destroy your group of servers, your server cluster. So you have to physically protect them. Okay? So reduce costs, we said that from running services. And we see this with the cloud. When you use AWS or Azure for Microsoft, you can just rent one physical server system with a certain processor, amount of RAM and drive space, and be able to run multiple servers on it, right? You just got to make sure that you protect that physical system and logical system. Okay. So we can virtualize many different machines on that single or few machines. And we can centralize administration and control for that physical system, right? The whole system. So that way you don't have to go across 100 systems. You can just centralize that on maybe a few system. So overall, I think it reduced the effort or the manpower in management, which ultimately really boil back to a business decision, which is cost. And a lot of the things that we do in security and IT is it's business oriented, right? Because, you know, we are the business, right? All systems are needed for business operation. So the types of hypervisor that you commonly see, you have used VirtualBox that's created by Oracle, and it's a free tool. You also can find VMware Workstation. I used to teach stuff in VMware, and then when I started working at college in the desert and mostly here, I switched over to VirtualBox because VMware Workstation require a little bit more resource as far as, you know, installation, but we did have it installed on these computers in case if you want. So there are Workstation Player, which is free. That's like equivalent version of VirtualBox. I feel like Player has some feature that VirtualBox does, but it does have some slight difference. And then if you get the Workstation, which is only a free trial, you can pay for that. It has a little bit more feature than the Workstation Player. So these are just hypervisor software that you would use to access or play your virtual machines. And then you would see VMware vSphere, which is used for like server environment. So as I mentioned before, in an enterprise environment, you can see that the user can go to different locations and they would be able to save, right? As you pause your virtual machine, it's a state machine. So it's saved its state, right? It creates that file. So when you look at your folder in your virtual machine, after you use it, you see that there are more than 2 files. At the beginning, we only saw the blue and the orange file, but as you use it, it has to save, right, the things that are modified on the machine. Then it adds additional status file and logs and things like that. So it saves that information. Now the server can do that. It would serve the virtualized environment to the other system through connectivity, right, through networking, and then you can have different virtual machines with different applications, and people will be able to access it. Microsoft uses Hyper-V, so this is a really good certification to have if you go for the Microsoft pathway. Azure Cloud Administration is, so it's either AWS or Azure, right? Those are the 2 main players that you see in the market for infrastructure. So what you would get is, if you get into that kind of market, but VMware, vSphere have been around for a long time. They are also a highly competitor. If you ever can work for VMware, it's one of the best companies to work for in tech. So they treat their employees really, really well. So a good company to work for, and so does Microsoft. But yeah, so you can learn Hyper-V administration. They have their certifications and such. Okay. Now, VMware doesn't mean, or virtual machine doesn't mean that we're not gonna get attacked, right? It is an operating system, it is software oriented, it runs through a software using minimal hardware. So you do have vulnerabilities that exist in the software, especially in the OS and the application itself. So we would not assume that we are 100% safe. There's nothing is 100% safe, right? So before we talked about the type of attack, let's come back to the notes real quick. Okay. So here, earlier I mentioned thin client. This might come up for A+. Now, thin client, you hear IT people talk about it, and they would replace all the workstation by using thin client. What does that mean? Smaller box, less hardware, right? It will have a processor, it would have some RAM, doesn't need a lot, not 32 gig like what you would see with these Alienware, would be a lot less. Just enough to run basic OS and be able to access the virtual machine, right? So thin client environment really strive on software control and licenses. So they would spend less money on the hardware and more money on software. So, you know, the decision is made on how the infrastructure would be managed and scaled, okay? So on, you know, if you go to a workplace where they don't have, you know, a workstation or a desktop, like what traditionally is there in enterprise, often that they would use thin client, small box, monitor, keyboard, mouse, not sometimes even not even a mouse, touchscreen, and that's it, right? And then when you have the virtual desktop infrastructure, your VDI, and you see this part of the virtual machine inside the folder that you see. So this allows you to have access to your network and internet and other remote locations. So now container virtualization is really big right now for cloud environment. So where you are at, you're at the cusp of, you know, cloud security started to become high, right? When long ago, when I started teaching security, and there was people talk about the cloud, but there's not a lot of emphasis in cloud security. Now we have the adaptive technology to be able to integrate that. And at the cusp of AI, so what you see is that you have a lot of companies that are using the cloud, and they're also using container-based type of tool. So this is a way that we can isolate a certain service or an app. It's good for testing environment. It's also good for not for controlling and management purposes. Let me put it that way. So you can set up different containers and then use the container. When you hear Docker, Kubernetes, those are container type of technology, and run it through host operating system. So it is a virtualized environment. It's mostly used for application and services. So for security itself, you often hear Docker or Kubernetes, okay? So you would see something like that. So it's good to also have AWS knowledge or Azure knowledge, right? So that's a plus. Okay, VM escape. This is when the attacker access the host system. So imagine if I'm on Kali Linux, right? When you boot Kali Linux, they tell you, oh, this is potentially can have some form of attack. When you boot, you see that as part of the grub, right? So rebleed is the attack that Kali is facing if you play. So there's sometime that they can come from your virtual machine and connect it to your host. So anytime that we have software services talking, there's a chance that someone can come. You know that they can come to your network through your printer, right? So if you have wireless printer, when you don't use it, turn it off, right? So anytime that things are connected and things are talking, there's a chance of something can come through that, right? And you can also have VM sprawl. This is just basically not managed VMs. And so we need to implement rules and access control and all of that. So let's go through and answer some more questions. So VM escape, make sure we know this for quiz and exam. So this attack allows the attacker to access your system, your host system from the virtual machine. So if I'm playing Kali Linux virtual machine, they can come through Kali and get into my Windows 10 host operating system. So we need to make sure we regularly update the software that we use to play or access our virtual machine. So if you use Hyper-V, make sure you patch it, and you also need to patch your OS or update your OS. Now in IT and security, we don't just run updates because it's there. At home, you might schedule update, or you might run it at the end of the month or the end of the week, whenever that will be convenient for you, right? If it doesn't impact you right away, the security issues. But in an enterprise environment or in business organization, we test the updates before we run the updates. So you would have a tested environment, you would run the updates to see if it impacts any other applications, because sometimes it negatively impact application. Okay, and then we talked about sprawl. So how do we fix the sprawl problem? We just make sure that we have server policies. Those are configurable rules that we can set up for our system. We can have access management and change management. So what does change management sound to? This is A+ asks about change management, configuration management. So configuration and change usually goes together, because when I reconfigure or I configure the system, it changes the system. Isn't that true? So you need to see how that change takes effect on other elements and components in your system and networks, right? So let's say that I change a policy for password for my user. It's no longer 8 characters, it's now 12 characters. It impacts the objects and the subject in my environment. Isn't that true? Because it impacts the user. You might have to reset more user account because they now don't know their password. They might have to recreate their passwords and things like that. So we have to have an expectation of how that change will impact the operation and the systems that are communicating, right? So with change management, we have to make sure we understand how that would take effect on our infrastructure. And then if you modify access, and we're going to work a little bit on access management today with Windows. So, okay. So when you create a virtual machine, a lot of times people can say, oh, I can make a copy of it, which I sometimes do. I make a virtual machine on my desktop, and then I would copy it to your drive, and that's how you have my virtual machine that you use, right? Sometimes you would need to clone it. So VirtualBox, preferably, if you move it to a different location or duplicate it, you need to use the clone feature, okay? Simply right-click the virtual machine on the playlist, and you can choose clone machine, and it would create a copy, but it's going to label it as a clone folder. So you can replicate virtual machines on the network by making copies of it, or you can create a backup of the primary ones, okay? This is a good way that we can create images of systems. So when they say images, basically it contains operating system and all the applications you need for the use of that system. So for example, right, like I tell the IT team that, hey, I need Windows 11 for all of the computers in PFC16, and I need Wireshark, and I need VirtualBox, and so I gave them a list of software. So what they do is they create, right, an image that contains all of the software, including the OS. And what they can do is they can use that same image to distribute it to all the computer. Nobody has time to go and install it one by one. We don't do that anymore. It's all automated through the network, right? Back in the days when I first hit the field, where I was 20-something, I was bringing CDs to each computer and plugging it in, and then eventually the people I worked for, EDX, they said, oh, you know what, we can just connect everything together and network them and then install it through the network. And I said, can I do that? Like, I wanted to get into networking, and that's how I transitioned to some of that, right? I also installed a bunch of ATMs, right? You guys go to ATM machine, I'm pretty sure. You ever see them service ATM? Sometimes they have security people come if they have to open it up, right? They have a special key, it's computer inside. Some, I think now they run embedded Linux. Some system used to run Windows, but I think most of the time they run Linux in the back. Most of your order system, if you ever see the error, they are Linux command, right? Like for example, I went to Popeyes and waste OS all the time. So when you make an image, you can also make a virtual machine image, just like what I did. And I would copy it for you so that when you have the exact image, this is really good when you test a group of systems at once, right? You would turn them on and you would run these virtual machines and see if they are behaving the same way. And that's how they're able to test things. You can do white box or gray box or black box to test like malware or network connections or security tools and so on. Okay, so imaging is just a way that we can replicate or duplicate that system with all the needed application for that environment, right, many times. And it's exactly the same. Okay, now that's different than the snapshot. Oops, sorry. So we talked about replication. And for the server, sometimes when they replicate, they just bring the data, they copy files from one to the other. Okay, we do this a lot in the network environment. Why? So for example, I'm at corporate office, right? I added 5 groups and 2 users in each group. But my companies are all over the world, right? Like Singapore, China, United States, multiple, San Francisco, LA, everywhere. Nobody's gonna have time to contact all the IT people at these locations to add the same thing. That just wastes of time and effort, right? You want to configure one system, and that system is gonna send all of that data to the other system. So by default, most company uses like 80% of the business use Microsoft OS for servers. It syncs in 30 minutes, okay? You guys ever register for class and you're like, where's my Canvas shell, right? Because system needs time to talk, right? So when you register for class at RCCD, that database needs to sync with WebAdvisor and EduNav and Canvas to make sure that all of these systems have the same data. So basically replication just means that it takes one source data and it sends to the other sources so that way it has the same uniform data. So if I'm at corporate office, I only need to configure it there, and I would send it to all the other servers around the world. So those users, if they're in Singapore or China or San Francisco, they're still able to access their system, right? With the proper privilege and permissions. Okay, snapshots. This is just your VM at a moment in time. You guys ever hit close and it asks you to stop the machine, right? Or to close it down, to pause it. So you can pause your machine. If you ever watch a movie and you hit that pause button, it's exactly that, right? It paused that system at that state in time because it saved that state. So if your system has a malware in that state, it's going to save that state. If your system is running gray and it has a certain application, it's going to save that state. So a snapshot simply is just that system state at that moment in time. And you can back it up. So why do we care about this? Okay, you're going to care real quick when you have issues like attacks, because you want to go to that moment in time. 6 months ago, when Caesar Palace was not being attacked, or at the beginning stage where they started investigating for the attack, right? You want to go back in time when that individual started leaking data when they're committing fraud. So what you can do is you can take an image of their desktop, right? Use that image and play it as a virtual machine. So you can go in and dig in and find out, like, how did they start leaking data? Is it through email? You can go to email server for that, but is it, you know, did they save their data there, or is it on the cloud server, or how do they go about getting their data, right? So
So snapshot simply just save a state, okay? And then you have persistent and non-persistent. So customizable image, and so we can add or subtract applications and policies, whatever you like. And then non-persistent is, you guys have that, all the same desktop for all the user pre-configured snapshots. So I made that and I copy it to your drive and you have the same ones throughout. And then when you modified it, it becomes persistent, right? Now each of you had gone in and you might have added all the users I asked you to, maybe not, right? It becomes persistent. Any question? Okay, so we talked about snapshots. These are good for backing up, testing, even investigation, patches, updates, applications. It just records the state of your virtual machine at that moment in time. And when we compare persistent to non-persistent, persistent, each user has specific, unique, maybe different image or system. Because you might save a different set of data compared to my system, right? For example, you might download your data from a website where I had created my own file. So each user would have their own set of data. And sometimes you have similar or the same data for users, but definitely the desktop would look slightly different. The non-persistent virtual desktop, this is you see uniform in an enterprise environment. All the desktop for all the users are the same. So if you go to, for example, like the library has the same, right, OS and application that you've seen with the humanities writing lab, right? You would see desktop there. So they use non-persistent virtual desktop where the computer would have, all of the computer would have the same application. With that, you have to make sure that the hardware is the same or close, right? Otherwise, you're gonna run into issues. So we started here on the computer. When you reboot all of them, they have non-persistent, but as you use it, you have persistent desktop. Right? So virtual desktop would be like that. So just like any system, how can you protect it? Most systems in any environment, network or isolated, we should monitor it. Isolated system are the safest system actually, right? So in a network environment, a system needs to be monitored. And when you're looking at endpoints, so what are endpoints? The workstation that you're sitting at, the smartphone that you're holding that's connected to the wireless network, the scanner that the shipping the shipping delivery person is using, right? Those are endpoint systems. So we need to monitor and protect endpoints because those have more exposure to usage, and each usage could impose threats, right? It could be that they have downloaded something, or they could modify, delete something, change configurations from the default and install updates. So changing the default password, right? Modify some of the basic configuration that could jeopardize the security of the system. For example, if we're looking at the wireless router at home, we wanted to change the default admin password and then disable some of the ports that might have been enabled by default. And we would run updates. And configuration and change management to make sure that we maintain security over time. It's not one time done deal, right? This is why there's job security in this industry, is because it's an evolving thing. Sometimes when we change, it might cause other issues, but that's okay. You need to make sure that you manage that change. So if it is expected, we want to be able to adapt to and solve the issue that is caused by the change or the configuration. And then we would deploy the applications and services when it's needed, right? Turn off the ports that you don't use because ports are associated with the services. Just think about doors to your house, right? We close the one that we don't intend for people to enter. So disable the ports and services, and that would tie back to the protocols. And then uninstall unneeded software, and we should do that on all systems, right? Including your smart devices at home or personal use. Disable accounts and guest accounts. So we did the wireless lab last time, right? You saw the guest network. It's disabled. You can turn it on for a short period of time and turn it off. Guest account is disabled. So we want to disable the unnecessary account. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of class. We don't delete account until the company policies say that we delete the account. Because with that, you delete the files that those accounts created. So when people gets fired or when they leave the company, we disable the account, right? And then you remove backdoors. So that would pertain more to software development and software design. I don't think backdoors is too apparent these days. I think that there are ways, but some people, they still use backdoors as a way to get back into the application. So those are just you guys know what backdoors are? I hear people say it all the time, and sometimes that can be confusing in a simple term. So developer, they would leave a way to go back to modify the software at a higher privilege. Okay, so for example, they need to modify certain communication channel for the application, and they need to go and modify the code. So a way that they would do that is through the so-called backdoor, just a way to get back into the application on the source code level to modify it. Okay, and so the attacker standpoint, if they know of that backdoor exists, they just capitalize on it. If you leave your back door to your house open, I'll just enter your house through it, right? But if it's not there, then they would install it. So they would take the role of what you see as the developer that would install it. So open that avenue back so that way they can come back to it and visit it and modify the configuration for it, changing the source code, etc. So we used to see a lot of this with application, like database applications and so on. But now I think a lot more developers are going through security training. So you don't see, by practice, that's required, right? You can't be, building software for companies without having to go through security training these days. Any question? Okay. I know it's a longer assignment, so let's go through them. You still have a lot of time. So how can an administrator secure baselines to the network? So when we, I think we touched a little bit on network topology, technologies, and so on. We talked about how we should protect network systems and looking at protocols and scanning and monitoring. So a baseline is just like normal behavior patterns or performance for your network in any given day. So that would be the minimum. So for example, right, like from Monday through Friday, for most days in the week, my performance for my network would have certain percentage for throughput, right? Certain amount of attacks that's happening on the VMD, maybe 5%, etc. Right? So all of that data, that statistic information would go into what we would see as a trend that would establish what we have in operation for that network or securing that network. So there are security tools or security management system that we can use to look at how our patterns and trends and behavior in our network needs to be protected. Okay. So for example, if you're looking at like a company like Amazon for e-commerce, they have data that would provide for them, right? Black Friday, this is the expectation for their e-commerce website. Like how many people are they expecting to hit the site and be able to do shopping, right? And then after Christmas or during a regular day like today or during Prime, etc. So heighten up the season compared to some of the seasons. So all of that data is going to give us an overall understanding of what's to be expected on the network and how we should be able to secure the network. And with that much traffic into an e-commerce site, they also have a bigger picture of how many attempts of attacks, SQL injection, breach attempts, and so on from different sources in a normal performing day compared to Black Friday or during the holidays or during Prime days. Okay. So with that, what we would see is we want to make sure that that is achieved at the minimum level or at the least expected of your network. So we would use tool to secure the state of the system. And then we want to make sure that we check the integrity. And when we say measure integrity, you can rank it, right? By points. How authentic is your data or what the systems are communicating? And then you can monitor the changes in your systems based on security performance. Okay. You can set up group policies on how things are being accessed, right? Group policy just tells you how the groups and the users in those groups are accessing objects like files, systems, printers, things that exist on your network. And then you can also use scanners like vulnerability scanners to determine the weakness, making sure that it meets your standard, right, at the minimum level. Now, remediation is when we trying to fix the issue, right? We would go back and look at your NAC or your network access control methods to really see if there are changes in your settings of your security baseline. And then we would set up a way that we would automatically isolate the system. So if a system is detected of malware, then that system should not be connected to the network logically or physically. The easiest way is to pull the plug on the cable, right? To make sure, because sometimes some malware is smart enough to make sure that that communication is maintained, right? You guys ever seen malware? People give you or show you the laptop that it's connecting to the internet, but it won't let them use anything on their desktop, right? It would occupy all the resources on that system just to communicate with its server. That's what it's intended to do. So to remediate that, guess what? Get rid of the malware by either logically or physically remove it, right? We might have to wipe that disk and reinstall the software because it's on the software. But physically, it's actually written to the disk. So you have to clean up the disk 4 or 5 times in order to reinstall the software. Because most people say, oh, I'll just reformat and reinstall. When you reformat, if it doesn't write over that section of the storage, it's still there. Okay. So especially on flash technology or SSD, it will live again. So does HDD. So. But all data is 0 and 1s. And then so if you zero it out multiple times, then it's 0, right? It's nothing. Any question? So earlier I mentioned about master image. That's an image that you create before you replicate it or duplicate it to the other system. And with that, you can take a snapshot of a single system, right? Like for example, I would install Windows 11, run all the updates on it, add all the application I need, right? Like maybe Microsoft Office and so on. So it's then already changed the state of my system. Then I would take a snapshot of it because now I already ran the updates up until March 2024. Then I would have a master image. Then I would be able to deploy it to the other system on the network. So you would configure it, you would have the proper security settings, you can change the policies, all of the things that you need on it, and then you would deploy the image, right? So this stage right here is usually carried out, right, at the end. I normally would test before deploy because things always go wrong when you deploy, right? Like you set up the rules, it's intended for the groups to be able to access certain things, but then they still can't access because there's conflict in your role somewhere or your group membership somewhere. So you have to go back and fix it. So you should always test it before you deploy it. But when you're in a rush and you meet deadline, most companies push you to test less and deploy first, right? So, and then so you would image that out to other systems or even the endpoints. So this is why master image is so useful because everybody would have the same uniform application. So nobody has more or less, and that's what they would need for the least privilege to access for that system. So you have consistency, and it's easier to manage security when there's consistency, right? So you can track the changes quicker because everybody starts at the same point, right? And then more or less as they change, you would see how integrity would change. Any question? Okay. Then on the next part, how do you secure a network with multiple types of systems? This is what we see, right? We don't live in the world where everything is all the same. That is ideal, perfect, but it doesn't always meet the criteria. So you have systems like, you have ATM machines. For example, if you take like Bank of America, they have ATM machines, right? They have computer for the teller. They have server systems. So there are all different kinds of system that makes the business run. Different system, different OSs. You have to make sure that you keep an inventory of your software and your hardware and you patch them. Right, on the hardware side, very, very important, and people tend to forget this all the time. Run firmware updates, especially if you're using Internet of Things like smart, thermostat, smart home, smart lights, right? Run even cars. You ever take your car to the dealership? You have some of the newer cars. They tell you, oh, we're gonna run some software updates in your car, right? Like a Tesla. Okay. Guess what? That means that they are patching some things on your car, right? Your car has a computer, so patch management is so important. Okay, creating a templates, and I think templates is ideal. A lot of the server system have templates that's already built in. You can modify security system too. So templates are just something to build upon, foundational tools or files. And then you can add or subtract from it to really establish what you need at the baseline, at the minimal for your network. Okay, so strategy for securing automated system, we need scripting. I think Shell and Linux is pretty decent, but you have Python that's already built in, Python 3. I think some old company that uses older system, they would still use Python 2.5 or 2.7, right? They should upgrade to Python 3. However, if you run across those, syntax is pretty close. There's some slight changes. I'm sure you have your smartphone, you can find the information, the documentation on Python. But scripting, PowerShell is also a key tool. So We'll use some of that today. It is different than command prompt. Some commands are shared across, but some are not. You can also run C code or things like that because it is built on C inside PowerShell. It is a way that it uses almost like the terminal emulator that we see in Linux, but it is command line based. So scripting is important. So it's always good to learn scripting. I know Cal State San Bernardino, I don't know if they transitioned to Python yet, but I know they
Old school companies still do like Visual Basic.
right? You might see VB script, some reported engine script. But if you understand logic in programming, it should be a simple concept to figure it out. Almost all languages have some form of documentation and resource for you to look at. Encryption, a way to change plain text to something that's not readable, and then to decrypt it is to put it back. And we would look at different algorithms for different purposes. And then permission, how they can access files and drives and folder. And what kind of access level they have. So the purpose of security baseline in companies is to really have the measurement of the system to make sure that we track the changes. I don't know if it's repetitive from the beginning, but in sense that if you can quantify that, it gives you a bigger picture of how your system has changed and how you will be able to control that change. It sounds very theoretical, but all of this is configurable, right? Apply to technical settings and all of that. Whatever that we state, right, in the sense of administrative side, this is the practice. We need to make sure that we follow that with the IT or the configuration side. So we would use analytical data, performance on our system for availability, different type of weaknesses and ranking level of weaknesses, and understand how that would impact or change the state of our system and how we would be able to control or maintain that change. Now, patch management and change management. Patch management ensure that the system stay up to date with current patches, right? A lot, Microsoft doesn't like calling fixes or patches. They used to call it service pack. But now they're just pushing through updates because marketing size, you don't buy anything that you need to patch or fix. With change management, this is a way that we can define or set up process for whatever system that's being modified, any modifications or upgrades. So when you reconfigure, you configure, that's also you have to have change management because you modify the state of that system. When you are upgrading operating system, right? That system also changed. So, which means that to have effective patch management, change management policy needs to be in place. They go together. They complement each other. Just like configuration and change management, they go together. Any question? Oh, these things are gonna come back again in many security classes and even graduates and doctorate level, it'll come back again. You hear it again, either in practice or, in academic or, okay. So in patch management, these are the things that we need to do. First, we need to identify the necessary patches. The update version and type, right? Software, so when you install software, it'll tell you this is the software version, but then there are some updates to that software version, and the developer, they would document why those updates are needed. Okay? And OS is the same way. It is a software. So it'll tell you, oh, you know, maybe close out some security issues or fix some of the bugs that exist in the software, like could be on the user side or the system side. So once you identify the version or the necessary patches that you need, you would download them from the vendor, Microsoft or software company. You would test them. Okay, and the best way is you virtualize it, or you have a test environment where you would, even a test network, you can run it with the applications and all the things like what the user has. And then once the tests pass, then you would deploy it. Then you would run those updates. So this is why it's kind of like a catch-22. Sometimes we update and then it's kind of late, but you know, so you have to keep up with this, and it has to be a little bit more consistent, and you know, your timeline needs to be adequate. You can't wait a long time. Back in the day, people used to wait months later to run Microsoft updates, but now you see updates are being pushed like all the time, right? So almost like every other day or weekly. And then once we do that, we verify. I normally like to also document so that way I can go back and refer, so that way I don't have to look all the information up, but you can maintain a catalog of your updates. The more organized you are, the easier it is in IT and security. I'm just gonna tell you. Organize with your file, your tools, and your inventory. Okay. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, we can use certain isolated system for testing purposes. These are called sandboxing. There are different category or type of sandbox. So you might hear like white box, black box, or gray box, right? And in security area, black box tends to be for malicious things, white boxes for things that are a lot more benign, and then the gray box is kind of in between. But sandboxing doesn't necessarily just fall in security. It's used for development and other things, R&D and so on. So it's just an isolated area on the system or a system that we would use for testing. And as an infrastructure, you are going to integrate the development side, because application and software tools, this is what your system needs and the user needs in order to accomplish tasks. Okay. Let's say that if I don't have any employees, everything is all robotic, right? I'm still gonna have to have software for the robots to understand the instructions, codes, functions, right? So you have to have development. And so that means that we've got to make sure that we have version control that allows us to see how the changes or how the software change over time. Like we talked about how we would do updates earlier, we would refer to the version and the version of the update. So version control is important. I harp about this in my computer science class all the time, right? Every time that they submit their GitHub. So if you run Kali Linux, you know already, right? When you download packages, those are software source code, right? That is written by a group of developers or a developer, and they track it. So that way you know which version. So when you do git, right, and then the URL from the GitHub, it's gonna pull it from that developer or that group of developer and install it. So Linux is really good at seeing which version that you currently have compared to what you're obtaining. So if you're trying to install it again, what does Kali tell you? The terminal says that it's already up to date. You have the latest version. Why are you installing it again, right? So tracking the version is important for us because in security, we see this as change. Because different version means change and change in application sometimes creates vulnerability for us. So, and always look at their documentation, what's being changed. They might add a service and that service might cause some issue. Okay. And then tests include hardware and software to test module. And then for the production is to include system and support. So in development, we're looking at versions of software and testing. That includes hardware and software. And you hear this all the time now, right? They need more security people that understand, hardware development along with software development to be able to test some of the things that are integrated with Internet of Things or with supply chain or things like that. That's the need right now. Okay. Even on low level programming, they need somebody to be able to see that. And then production is when we integrate system and support. So when you hear IT people say that, oh, this system is for production, that's really the system is being used for operations and it needs to be maintained and support. So APIs is part of development. Instead of having an application, we can have one main application and add an API on top of it to be able to execute certain additional tasks. Okay. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. It can be used, it's commonly used in security for tools purposes. So for example, I might have a Python script that I use on my server, right? That it would automate whenever that, let's say that I would scan, right, based on a condition. So for example, when the system is detecting a certain type of activity, right, it's gonna check the if and else statement and it's gonna scan, it's gonna activate the scan. But in order to incorporate that scanner, I have to use an API because I don't want to sit there and write a scanner. I'm not a developer. I just pull a scanner. For example, I wanted to use Wireshark. Then I would just integrate Wireshark API with my script. So it would say if, right, it meets this condition, right, activate Wireshark. And in order to run Wireshark, you use Wireshark API, right, into your script. And then you test it, it works, right? And then you deploy it onto your server and you monitor it to make sure that it's running good. And that's how we have automation, and that could be your job, right? So we can use API for many different things, okay? And this is just some area that you can implement it. So, but when you use API, a lot of the APIs require keys, right? For example, Shodan is a really good search engine that we use to find all the IoTs and automated system in the world, including your surveillance camera. But with that, it asks for you to create a key. That's how it's able to authenticate system to system, right? So make sure that you protect that key. How your system is authenticating. So strong authentication methods is very important. Making sure that you authorize it to do certain things that are appropriate, that is needed, okay? And then because somebody is gonna piggyback through that system and enter your network and it's open sesame, right? And then defeat the whole purpose of automation and securing through automation. So making sure that we control access. So that's, I think access is the key to all, right? And this, we going in circle with this all the time. okay? And then we would make sure that we encrypt traffic because someone can scan you and they would be able to see the details of your packets and how your data is being exchanged. So that's very important. API can make your world go round, but it also can destroy you, right? So from a standpoint of someone, I really enjoy, looking at application security because I really feel like, there are a lot to really explore. And every time that I do it, I would learn something new about it, no matter how long and how often I do it, right? So it's very interesting to me. So with that, I see flaws in APIs being integrated, and I also see good things that come out of it. So we weight the risk, and sometimes we just have to be careful. Let me move this down in case you're still working on the question. Okay, I know this is long. We don't have to put verbatim for 19. So, and these, I list many things, right? You don't have to list that many things, but you need to know that. Because could be interview questions. It's just good for practice. Peripheral devices, what are they? Right? Projection, okay, displays, wireless keyboard, things that we use for our system on a daily basis. So when you use wireless keyboard and mice, the transmission can be intercepted because it is radio signal, right? We know that wireless is prone for that. So just have that knowledge and expectation is gonna let us think about how we can better protect them. Display, right? On screen or on projection, so sensitivity of data, limit the view for screen privacy. And now they sell a lot of screen privacy filter. University of Hawaii, they had data breach, and they also violated FERPA regulation a long time ago. So they implemented, those booths. So you see university where, they provide you access to their computer to fill out financial aid or whatever. They have to put you into those small little cubicle with a little shield, right? To make sure that the person next to you is not looking at your screen. Okay. So sensitive data and private data and protection for your data display is important. External storage devices, right? External hard drive or even USB. Things that people, or, micro SD. Those can be lost physically, stolen, misplaced, and they might leak data. So that means that we have to find ways to encrypt them as they leave the facility. So, I've worked with companies where as soon as you before, you can't just unplug the drive, right? You have to eject it before you can allow the drive to be ejected. It activates the encryption tool, so it protects the data, the content of that drive. And even if you pick it up and you plug it into your computer, you can't see anything because it is encrypted. It does take a little bit more time and resources, however, it does protect the data, right? That drive is only readable with that system in that company, okay? And then digital camera. I know that they're making their way they're come back now with the digital camera, but let's think about other type form of digital camera, right? So same risk as your external drive because they could be stolen, destroyed, damaged, lost. Your smart devices and Wi-Fi enabled micro SD. These are also wireless transmission. So these are some of the example that you can see with peripheral devices. And then of course, printer or your scanner, printer, and copier all in one. Those are called MFD. All of them are embedded systems. They most of the time have operating systems. So if you see, like if you work for a company that has a huge printer, right? It is a computer. It has hard drive. It has network connection, like an Ethernet adapter, sometime multiple hard drives, right? Your printer at home has RAM, and it does have a small, right, embedded Linux operating system or embedded system. Usually it runs Linux, very light, right? It might have, menu feature. Some of it could be written in Java. Usually they are. If you use like refrigerator or microwave, the new smart refrigerator, right? With the screen, it tells you all the weather. Those have OSs in the back. Sometimes they run Android in the back. So that means that they have some form of storage, RAM or internal drives, right? And that can be at risk. You know that printers, before it prints, it saves your data to RAM, right? I'm pretty sure that some of you have learned that from CIS25, or you're learning it now. So sometimes, right, data is exposed to the printer that way because data is stored to a storage, and if you can get to the storage, you can get the data. And in forensic class, we learned that we can export a RAM storage using tools like volatility and different things. They're great tools. And so RAM needs power. So if you shut that thing off, right, like it's gonna flush it at the end of that cycle. So, this is why I tell you, you don't need your printer, turn it off, especially your Wi-Fi printer. Most of the time, I have a Wi-Fi printer, and I'm always skeptical about turning it on. So, because you can search for it. There are tons of story that, they can go through printers and things like that. So, and then update your devices, and make sure that they're securely connecting to the network. And when they are, gotta make sure you monitor your devices. So I'll always operate on a defensive tactic manner, right? Like you are always, you are that obsessive compulsive, not suspicious of everybody. That's what I'm telling you, of everything, right? So monitor the devices, prevent data leak and interception of data, use encryption, and secure network connectivity. Any question? So there are tools in the market. I think I put some here. So you can simply search self-encrypting drive. So if you buy this type of drive, so let me see if my old URL from last time still works. Yeah, so this is the SSD. It's, it's not expensive. So it is a feature that you can get, and you can find them online. It doesn't have to be this type. Okay. So for the next question, you can simply search for self-encrypting drive, or you can put in, SSD if you want, that's what you're looking for. The internet will give you options, and you just need to give me a brief description of what it is if you want to include the price. So here showing you that, yeah, so it uses Opal encryption 2.0. And then with this, we can research how good is Opal encryption, right? When it says encryption, it doesn't mean that it's excellent encryption. We just got to make sure that we know of how this encryption is effective. And then you can always chat with their agent. But definitely affordable. Okay, so if I have 1,000 computer, I'm gonna have to do change management now, because remember, right, we're replacing the hardware. We might just add this on as a secondary drive. So, this might store some of the sensitive data, and then our regular data is gonna be on the existing drive on the system now. So with that, we would have to do change management. And then we also need to train the user on how to use encryption and all of that, right? Okay. So find the tool that you want to use for self-encrypting drive.
So that.
It doesn't have to be exactly like.
You don't,
You can find your own. So I would Google self-encrypting drive and you can find some. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the same exact one, but you will find some different product. Right? Different capacity, different brand. You can find SSD or other type if you wish. Okay, so while some of us are looking that up, operating system, we talked about that. Patch management. Let me scroll down. Okay, so talk about application, blacklisting and whitelisting, sandboxing, secure tagging or staging. I think CIS25 spent quite a bit of time on BIOS and UEFI. But when your operating system is loaded, make sure it does do the boot integrity. So sometime you would have malware that impact like boot sector virus, things that would impact the boot. Sometime rootkit would do that. So it changes the nature of the boot file. So your OS cannot load, and if your OS cannot load, then it capitalized on the unavailability area of the OS, right? And then your trusted platform module, your TPM, this is a hardware chip that is integrated with chipsets or motherboard. And it's so important that we focus on, the design of hardware and firmware, because this is a really needed area for security now. I think the industry does really, really well with networking and protocols and services and all of the tools that we have. Because it's such a huge hodgepodge of different technology and different platform and different things for different needs. At the end of the day, we still have deficiency in the hardware area and the firmware. Okay. But some of the things that you can look at is EMI, which is electromagnetic interference. This is the bleeding of the signal. If you ever have your smartphone near a microphone, like a loudspeaker microphone, you hear that whine, pitchy noise, right? Or some kind of staticky noise. It's an interference of signal. Because one signal is bleeding into another signal. So that is just a form of interference, right? Or if you use your smartphone near a loudspeaker, sometimes that happens. So can someone use a device to cause the bleeding of signal? Sure, right? It's a good way to jam a signal. I think we talked about this before. And then your EMP is pulse. So that's just a short burst of EMI. So instead of a longer wave, it might be just a shorter burst. So a heightened wave, but in shorter increments. And so why do they care to do this, right? First of all, in order to detect signal is to build a signal reader. And then once the signal reader is there, so all your system is emitting some form of interference, all your cables are. Even your lighting, right? Even your screen, things, because that's what they say, right? Like if we live around electronics, we will get cancer because it's all of these things that are impacting us, but in a large quantity, right? Not just microwave signal, but electronic signal. So all of these things have some kind of emission of signal. But when you're using signal, you guys ever seen, like, maybe some of you serve in the military, you see guns that take down drones, right? You ever wondering how they do that? How do you think they do that? So drone is also wirelessly controlled, right? So, and then it also uses certain form of signal. So if you emit a certain form of signal or create an interruption in signal, right? Like interrupting Zigbee, it would cause that interruption in the controller of a certain drone. Only the military is allowed to do that now. Like it's illegal in the United States. You can't get those type of weapons. But so in a larger sense, if you're looking at warfare, utility centers, things like that, these things play an important role. Supply chains, things that would impact us as a nation. We have to think about like how the system would break down into a signal format. I just saw a job yesterday because I was helping one of my computer science student. He's interested in getting into low-level programming job. And there were a couple of jobs that came up for security that was really interesting. There's also an internship, and when I find it again this week, I'll post it. Specific internship for wireless signal for tech companies. They are doing research on wireless signal and how, and it's a paid internship. I think for some level it's like a year, and then sometime it's for the undergraduate, it's the summer. So I think it's really interesting if you want to get into the area, because most of the things we use is wirelessly. To understand how to build out some of their equipment with wireless technology. Something like that would happen at Cisco company, stuff like that. But, that's kind of cool to get into. Disk and system setup. So let's go to the next one here. Okay. So any question on EMI and EMP? It just causes interruption, signal interference, storage damage. And then how should you secure your storage disks, right? Logically, we would encrypt so that way our data is not exposed in the case that it falls into the wrong hand. If it's your hardware chip, we can use TMP, right? The chip to protect another group of chips. We can also physically just lock them up if you are pulling the drive and storing it physically. So back in the days, we would back things up to tape. I'm pretty sure that your teacher, your book talks about that for CIS25, right? And some companies still back up to tapes because it still works. And we have to secure those tapes. So we have to lock them up in a fireproof cabinet. We have to ship them out to a secured center. Right now, I think there's still companies that still shipping things out like files and drives and things like that. But a lot of the times we put them on the cloud now. Any question regarding securing storage? So when you don't use your micro SD anymore, right? You gotta make sure that you physically break them and dispose them, burn them, right? If you just throw them in the trash, that's an entire chip. Someone could get a hold of it. I'm such a hoarder for technology. I don't like to throw anything away because I'm like, yeah, data is still on that. I don't want people to get my data. I have to clear that out. Okay, so data loss prevention. Okay. There are many things that would go into a plan for data loss prevention, your DLP. So if you disable the USB port on your system where people cannot connect to your USB, sometimes that could be challenging because your mouse and keyboard, but yeah, you can disable some of the unused port. You would reduce the risk of transferring malware or data through a USB port. You can also prevent data loss by monitoring network traffic and screening keywords or patterns of words. And there are software tools that you can do that. It will look for digits, things that look like a social security number, things that would look like, personal identifiable information or an X-ray. So we can screen or filter out these things and we can block them from being transmitted across the network, especially through email. So email security is so important. You can manage rights to files, copyright data using encryption and permissions. So we would look at access to files, right? Permissions on how we would read, write, save, or edit our files. Intellectual property is important. I think that plays into the copyrighted data, the ownership of the data. There's always an argument about that and intellectual property in an organization. You can use things like Unified Threat Management, known as UTM. These are the type of systems that would use security tools to detect activities that are anomaly or impacting your data based on the behavior and signature. So very similar to your security software on your home system, but on an enterprise scale, it would have more on the infrastructure features from database to web servers to network systems and so on. And I talked about filtering email for content control. That's essential. And we can use encryption to protect data integrity, right? And encryption gives you more than integrity. It gives you confidentiality, integrity, accountability, and so on. We would control file access. I think that's just repetitive from the top. You don't have to put all of that. And then we can also use encryption for database fields. So fields are columns in the relational database table. So for example, I might have a column that has passwords, right? I have a column that would have username. I would have column that I would have credit card number. You know, when you save your credit card, gotta go into a database somewhere, right? But records are roles. So, you know, I might have Jane Doe as a record because she's an account. And with that, her date of birth, her driver license, her credit card information, her password, that's part of the record. So that's on a roll. So we can protect one field, like the password field or the credit card number field. That would be sensitive data using encryption. We don't have to do the whole database shebang, but we care about some of the pieces of information in that database. So the types of cloud we learned from before: infrastructure as a service, okay, or that might be new to you now. Platform as a service, PaaS, and software as a service, your SaaS. So infrastructure as a service, you might use AWS or Azure, formerly known as SharePoint, right? Platform as a service or software as a service. So the types might be on the premise or leased through cloud service provider. Your CSP is cloud service provider. I know we love acronyms in this field. It's just endless, right? So on the premise, meaning that I might have a private cloud that I own. I have a data center in my company, and I would hire the IT and the security people to protect and maintain it. Or I can lease it through Amazon or Microsoft, or even some cases, if it's in the other area, I would use Google or another company that's smaller. Okay. So I'm sorry, let me move this down. Are you guys okay with 23? Can I go to the lower section? And then we'll take a break shortly. You know, we're due for a break. So they have a thing called the Cloud Access Security Broker. And there are other components like identity management feature on the cloud. All of those features on the cloud through your cloud service provider is important, but your CASB or your cloud access security broker works with identity management resources, right, for authentication and so on, to make sure that you have an adequate set of tools for your cloud environment. So it's really how you manage it. Okay, so use cloud access security broker. So in an enterprise environment, you might have public cloud and private cloud. So for example, if I'm thinking of something in the scale of like Amazon is an enterprise, right? Walmart is an enterprise. A lot of the Fortune 500 companies, large scale, right? They are an enterprise. So they might have a combination of different types of cloud systems or cloud environment. So you would have hybrid. Private, that some of it they own and then some of it they lease out. Sometimes you might have company that only have their own cloud, but it's rare these days because I think just the overall maintenance of it is expensive. I know Facebook, they own Instagram and other products. However, their cloud environment, I think they contract a company to maintain their data center, right? They own some of it. So the ownership is not 100%. So I think that's for liability reasons. So if you allow your employees to bring your own device to work, right? Don't be surprised that when you get the security specialist job, they said you must provide your own laptop and your laptop has to meet the spec. You said, great, I need a job to make money and now they want me to spend money first in order to make money. But that's typical, right? Bring your own device to work is common. So if you allow that, as soon as they attach to your network, you need to make sure that it scans for health of that system. If, they come in with malware, it should detect it right away. Usually, most companies would require a term of use for their network and environment because that way you can enforce your policy. So that way people don't go crazy and just download a bunch of things that would be harmful to your network. So they would be more mindful of how it's used, right? You lay out the rule, you said, these are allowable use and these are not allowable. And even if your settings might not speak to that, which it should, but, in the case that if they break the rule, you have the right to remove them from the network and the organization. Control file storage with permission and policy. So how they save the file. You can also control capacity, right? Many companies don't, but I think some that are, cost sensitive, then they would control. They don't let you download and save everything on the local system. And then encrypting and preventing sensitive data leak, especially in the area of if the system is accessing your network at one point in their own network. So if they bring their own devices, it's gonna be very important. Okay. I'm gonna do this with my 41A class this semester because I felt like we need to review. Okay. So I'm gonna type this down here just for notes. So I'm sure you can find the notes in the notes, but you can find a lot of tutorials that talk about this. So read, write, and execute are the 3 common commands that you see in Linux. Okay. And because Linux stemmed from Unix, they use octal system, which is binary based. In octal system, there are only 3 numbers and it goes until it's from 0 to 8. Okay. So I'm sorry, 0 to 7, that gives you 8. So on the most right, you would see, so on the binary, okay. So for example, if I have 0, 0, 1, like this, right? The one signal, that means that it's on for the execute and it's off for the read and write, sometime in Linux, they would refer to dash dash X. That's a 1. Understand? Now, why is it 1? Because the least significant bit on the right is always going to start with a 1. A 1 represents 2 to the power of 0. Why is it 2? Is because 2 is the system numerical value for binary, 0 or 1. There's only 2 numbers, right? Our counting number system is 10 base, right? You count 0 through 9, and then you repeat again, 10, 11, 12, and so on. Okay. Now, in the case where if you have 0, 1, 0, like this, okay, this is going to be equal to dash, write, dash, right? Anytime you see a 0, that represents read, write, execute. So that means that this is equal to A2. Because the rightmost digit is 1, that's off. The next digit is 2. 1 times 2 is 2, because it's 2 to the power of n. So this is on, and then this is off, so it's 2. Okay. So this is a binary system. If you're not sure, you don't know this, put in a calculator, right? Like if I don't know, in Windows, you have a programmer calculator. Open up your calculator. And then you turn it into the programmer mode by clicking the menu and select programmer. So on a binary, if you go 0, 1, 0 like this, click on the octal, it's a 2. See? Your computer is a calculator. Okay. Let's try one more if you guys see. Okay, so what if I have 1, 0, 0? So that's gonna be a what? Read dash dash, right? What's the value of that in octal? So it's off at 1, it's off at 2. So 0 plus 0, so 1, no, so those, and then 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, right? So this is equal to 4. Okay, so all you have to know is the rightmost digit is a 1. The next digit to it is a 2. If it's on there, it's a 2. If it's off, it's a 0. We don't add that. Okay. What about 1, 1, 0? So that's gonna be what? Read, write, and dash on the execute, right? So what's the value for that? This is off at 1, so we don't include that one. 2 is the next one that's on, plus 4 is a 6. Okay, so you always have to remember to start with 1 on the right hand side. If that one is on, if it's showing a 1, you add that 1. Anytime that you have a 1, you add it. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna do something better. Okay, give me a second. Let me insert. Okay, so the digit from the right represent a 2 in decimal. I mean a 1 in decimal. Okay, the one next to it is a 2. And then the one next to it is a 4. And this scale doesn't change. So it's 2 to the 0 power is 1. 2 to the first power is 2. Okay. So 2 to the power of n. So 0. 2 to the first power. I know if you took my 40A last semester, you already saw this. This is binary conversion. Okay. So the placement of the digit is important. Okay. So if I have a 1, and a 0, what do? I add the value that has the 1, which is a 2 and a 4, like that. So it gives me a 6, you see? I don't add the value that has a 0, right? So this is my binary right here. Let's say that it's this, right? So if I place it, the 0, it's off, so I don't include that 1, but it's on at the second digit, which is equal to 2 in decimal, right here. And then the next one, which is 4, I add it. So whenever that there's a 1 on the signal, we add that value. So when you give it a 6 in Linux, it knows that it's read and write, not no execute. But if it's read, write, and execute full permission, it's a 7, right? 1 plus 2 plus 4 is going to be 7. So whenever you see a 7 in permission for Linux command, you know that it is full control. Read, write, and execute. Okay? Because it's 1 plus 2 plus 4 is 7.
Is there a definition of that in the notes?
Let me see. But you went through 40A with me and binary conversion. So I do have a video on binary conversion for many of my classes. So you can also view that. Yeah, it is binary conversion. Remember we did IP addresses here. So I just put down 1, 2, and 4 for read, write, and execute. That's what all you need to remember, right? So if it's a 7, it's 1 plus 2 plus 4. If it's a 5, it's 1 plus 4, right? You guys can do the basic math like that. So that means it's read and execute. Read, write, and execute. That one is 1 plus 2 plus 4 is 7. Oops. Okay, so to answer that question, sorry, I had to make sure that we all understand this. So the permission for file.txt with the read and write, so the read is 4, the write is 2, so there's 4 plus 2 is 6. So you just have to know that read is 4. Why is it 4? Because it's the most on the left in the octal. So it's 4, 2 to the second power. And write is 2 and execute is 1. It's always going to be like that for Linux. Read is 4, write is 2, and execute is 1. So you always remember the X is 1 and 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, and that's how they are. Okay. So a 6. So how do you prevent data loss? Make sure we prohibit the use of removable media, or at least reduce the use of it anyways. Do data exfiltration. Make sure we control that because it's an unauthorized way to transfer data to outside of the organization. Like I upload it to my personal cloud, right? So we can block that. So we can blacklist, right, personal cloud usage while they're at work. And then we can use cloud-based DLP, data loss prevention. We can filter for sensitive data, such as personal health information, or PII, personal identifiable information. Sorry, this is a lengthy chapter. That's a lot of critical content. Any questions? Okay, so let me stop the video.